Hi, everybody. I'll be the moderator for today's session, and it's going to be a great one. My name is Joe McKendrick. I'm a contributor to Forbes magazine. I write a lot about AI. You may have even seen some of my articles in Harvard Business Review. I talk about the trustworthiness of AI. That's been my thing. And it's going to be very interesting to talk with our great panelists here about the issues around AI, what's going on with risk and potential or existing regulation. And why don't we start with introductions? I'll let everybody introduce themselves. Magdalena, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Magdalena Koenig. I'm the General Counsel for a business called AIQ. We're based in the United Arab Emirates, and we develop from scratch homegrown artificial intelligence for the energy sector.
Hey, I'm Drayton Wade. I'm COO of Kognitos. We're an AI startup backed by Coastal Ventures and working primarily with financial services companies and finance and accounting departments to automate long, complex workflows.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. Kieran Norton. I'm the head of cyber AI and automation at Deloitte.
Hey, everyone. I'm Hariom. I'm a VP at Barclays. I work for a team called Risk AI. We make AI and Gen AI solution for different use cases within the bank. I'm also author of this book called Machine Learning Blueprints for Finance, and I also advise a couple of fintech startups as UC Berkeley, as a part of UC Berkeley Startup Accelerator.
Okay, great. And in this session, we're going to be discussing the issues, the unique risk and challenges financial services industries. A lot of companies face challenges with AI risk, and with financial services, it's going to be kind of a different breed of risk. Maintaining consumer trust, the confidence of policymakers who are putting these regulations or potential laws forward. Also, I'd like to, as we go along, talk about can AI also play a role in helping to mitigate the risk that we see with AI? Maybe AI can provide advice to financial services decision makers. The agents, the agentic AI can help with customer service reps, all the way up to the CEOs of financial services companies. So a lot to discuss here. Risk is a huge topic, and basically it's embedded in the DNA of financial services business models. Financial services risk is part of the game, and it's been going on for decades. I want to ask the panelists here, does AI introduce something new to the risk formula? Is this something new that financial services companies have not met before?
I've got a strong opinion on that matter, so I'll jump in. First off, I know many of you didn't realize you were coming to a rave today with the lighting, but I guess that's just an added benefit. I think, if you look at Gen AI, that introduces some nuanced risks, right? Those aren't new risk domains. Those are risks we've been dealing with in financial services for a long time: security, privacy, data, et cetera, reputation, regulatory. So I would say that there are actually just nuances to things we already do as a profession. We already have programs around. And I would certainly recommend that people look at modifying the programs they already have to address the kind of unique nuances of Gen AI risk, rather than building whole new risk programs, right? You don't need to put another layer on top of things that you already do. You need to modernize what you do today to address it.
Okay, great.
Adding to that, AI is not new in finance. It's always been there. There are a few areas in finance which can't operate without AI these days, like fraud detection and loan approvals, KYC, and all that. And the risk, as he mentioned, has always been there. The risk that we have seen in the traditional AI, mostly around like biasness, explainability, privacy of the data. With Gen AI and the growth around Gen AI, the new things that comes into picture would be the hallucination, the accuracy. How do we check for that? Do we have some benchmark for that or not? And the companies have started working on that. They have small pilot projects, leveraging what was done, leveraging the resources from the AI teams, including the people, including the data centers and whatnot. And that's the way to go forward, as in just leverage what you already have and then find out new risk of generative AI and move forward.
I actually think there is a little bit different risk. I don't disagree with what y'all are saying. I agree on keeping the same ones the same. But I do think there's a difference in the autonomy question to an extent. So our work primarily is in automation and agents and things of that nature. And I'd previously been in the RPA world for a long time before that. In the RPA world, your risk was pretty much contained to the rules that you put into the process, right? It may fail, but if you put some rules that have adverse effects. But now with agents, you are getting into action that's being taken, without humans, at least at a portion of that workflow. So I think you do have to think through, where do you want humans still intervening? Where do you still want humans reviewing the work and having a means of doing that with these agents? I think the biggest risk, in just preparing for this panel that I thought of, and that does worry me a little bit, that's more systemic, is agents operating with other agents and the chain effects that you could have. It reminds me a lot of like the flash crash back in 2010 on the quant side, where you have these kind of incentives that are occurring between different intelligence systems. I think you could see that happen with agents. So again, thinking about where can humans still grab the steering wheel is one thing that's a little bit different perhaps than AI or some of the technologies that have been deployed before.
Yeah, human in the loop is definitely continue to be part of our life. I don't think you can get the regulators comfortable without human in the loop anytime soon, right? That's going to take a long time. To your point, you could do bad things faster, right? That comes back to just solid, to some degree, solid system design, right? Making sure that there's, agents can run amok, and a series of agents can't go do some unpredictable outcome. But again, those are some things we're familiar with from a technology perspective. Certainly, you do need to think through the hallucination and how do you address that. And look, in the LLMs, hallucination is going to be a fact of life for a while, right? There's techniques we can do to improve upon it, but that's why I think in finance, for example, you're going to see a lot of small language models, because you can control the training data set more reasonably, and you can probably get towards a more certain outcome in that case.
Yeah, if I can just add a little bit to some of the themes that we're talking about here. I think one of the key things to think about is whether you're utilizing AI in finance or in any sector for an advisory role, or whether it's a decision-making role. So whether you're advising a human in their capacity to then take a decision, and you then still have that human element, or whether then the AI is actually fully taking a decision. And I think what regulators are doing around the globe is taking a different approach depending on where you are. So again, going back to whether you're talking about finance in particular, so the UK in particular is looking at a sector-specific approach to regulation, rather than, I'm sure everyone around the room has heard of the EU's AI Act, which takes a risk-based approach. So in the UK, for example, they're looking at how do we specifically look at things that are specific to the financial industry, and the FCA is looking at how they can look at, for example, financial crime and things related to that. So I think that's something really critical to think about.
Okay, great. And, you may have noticed we have a strobe light on us here. That's just for the effect. We're giving you special effects along with our great discussion here. Curious, obviously, most of you, or if not all of you, are working with AI to some degree within your organizations. How many work with or are aware of kind of more under the radar type implementations? Show of hands. How many are maybe employees working with ChatGPT, on their own, or do you have that kind of situation within your organization?
Shadow AI, basically.
What's that?
Shadow AI, is that what you're getting at?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, that's my worst nightmare. As a lawyer, that's my worst nightmare, where people are utilizing AI, under the radar. Because what you want to be doing at a kind of a C-suite level is bringing your company on the journey with you, so that you can ensure governance in terms of decision making, or how that AI is being implemented or used. So don't tell me. If you are doing that, don't tell me.
And just to kind of level set things for the audience, we're talking about generative AI. And there's also been AI that's been around for a while, the predictive or operational AI. I'm wondering if we could maybe level set that for the audience and talk about if there's any distinctions, if these need to be treated differently in terms of risk, avoidance, and everything else, or if this is something that is kind of blending together.
So, historically, since last 10, 15 years, what we have been using is traditional AI. So there are a lot of techniques, supervised, unsupervised. We call it prediction model. So the idea was to look at the data, find pattern, and make decisions, right? So that's what we have been doing. And I mentioned about the risk related to that. In finance especially, you need explainability. Like if you're rejecting loan of a person, you have to explain that person that, hey, I mean, this is the factor due to which I'm rejecting your loan, right? So the risk or the explainability has to be there. The privacy of the data has to be there. So these are the couple of things which we had for predictive AI. Now coming to the generative AI, the simple definition is something that generates text, videos, audios, right? And here, I mean, the panel has already mentioned about a couple of risks related to that. I mean, the key risk that I see is hallucination, especially in finance, right? So for example, there is a hedge fund trader who is using generative AI to generate a code. And by mistake, there's this code which kind of crashes the market. I mean, just giving an extreme example. So you need to be aware of these kind of situations, not just, let's say, at the model level where you're trying to protect for or you're trying to control for hallucination and accuracy, but also the bigger picture on the economy or the finance sector as such.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I agree with that approach. I would also add that a lot of the techniques we've used historically around AI, ML are actually now being layered on top of Gen AI to help address the hallucination issue to some degree. Still early, but there's going to expect to see progress there. So I agree. I mean, I think AI, ML has been in use for a long time. You probably already have systems in your environments that are, that are operating. And chances are you're already sort of protecting those and doing all the things that you do from a data privacy perspective, et cetera. Gen AI does introduce a few nuances. You mentioned hallucination being one of them. Potentially when you get into the cyber side of things, you get into model poisoning and other aspects. Again, not totally new concepts from a security perspective, but applied in a new technology, and so you have to adapt to address those. But again, you want to have a program for looking at the risk overall, not just narrowly focusing in on hallucination as your one issue. You do need to basically build in an overall into your software development lifecycle.
Yeah, I think the actual approaches to mitigate the risk here are going to converge or be the same. I don't think it needs to be recreated on the Gen AI side. The one thing I think is different probably around generative AI, it goes back to your centralization comment, which I think is really important, is before most of the AI initiatives were very centralized within financial services companies, either within the CDO or CIO or CTO organizations. You had a COE, you had this control and effect of how you wanted to roll it out and have access to systems. The proliferation of different applications around, they're LLM based, makes them more available to people throughout, which is why you have this shadow AI type approach. But the reward, is potentially a lot higher than before because the usability is there. But what's interesting, we've been selling in the market for several years. We saw a lot of that kind of shadow AI thing occurring about a year ago, where people were coming to us from the business side or others. In the last year, we've seen it get much more centralized, and particularly under the CIO, organization. So I think those controls are occurring and are, being applied.
Okay, great. Drayton, you mentioned the CEO, CIO getting involved. In your perceptions, how do you see the leadership, the C-suite folks, viewing AI risk? How do they look at the challenge, and is it well understood at this point? Among the top folks.
So I went to a really interesting event recently with a bunch of general counsels in the UAE, and terrifyingly, I mean, their main comment was that their CEOs were basically taking the view that they don't care about the risk, and it's a bandwagon thing. If we don't do it, we don't implement it, we don't, get on the AI train somehow. And that was absolutely terrifying. And I think all of my general counsel colleagues were also kind of terrified. But I think that the concept is that it's like use it or lose it. And there's because things are moving so quickly, if you don't start now or initiate a program within your business immediately / yesterday, then it's going to be too late. And again, that fills me with dread, although I'd like to say I'm not, you're probably familiar with the term business prevention officer. I don't like to use that style of advisory in my business, but I think there has to be, or there should be, a middle ground between, taking that leap of faith and hoping that the potential risk doesn't happen whilst evaluating it at the same time, maybe in parallel. I work with the business a lot of the time, to talk about risks whilst they're already doing it, but looking to mitigate.
Yeah, I think that's showing up in the use cases. So we see companies, pushing forward. So a lot of our clients are working on internal facing use cases first because it's lower risk. You're not pushing things out to your customer or the public. Additionally, they're, many times stopping a pilot, right? They're not getting out of pilot mode. I think we're going to see a lot of push to get more pilot applications into production so we can start to realize greater value from AI and Gen AI investments in 2025. But we're certainly seeing a lot of companies stalling out there because, they get started and then they go, okay, wait a minute, now how are we really going to do this?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Back to your comment, what we often hear is something similar to this, where one, the board comes to the CEO and says, okay, what's our AI strategy going to be? And then the CEO turns to the CIO and says, okay, what's our AI strategy going to be? And then the CIO is often scrambling to figure that out. And it's actually
co-pilot. That's the answer.
Yeah, exactly. But what's interesting is I do see a lot of C-suite, particularly in the CIO org, looking at it essentially like a risk-reward matrix at the end of the day, and it really is oriented that way. A lot of the high-value use cases do pertain levels of risk because now you're not working with a deterministic system. You're working with something that even if it's 95% accurate, there still is that 5% kind of variance. So you have to consider where to apply it first. And I think the other question we're hearing C-suite, and I think it's the right question, asking a lot, is what can't be undone at the end of the day. So if you're working on a marketing use case, right, and it hallucinates and puts out something nonsensical, it's very easy actually to clean that up and put it out further. But if you're working on payments reconciliation and it misses $1 million payment, you have a much larger problem, with potential downstream impact.
Yeah, I think I agree to all the points. What I've seen is in terms of Gen AI, the adoption has been, as these guys mentioned, low risk internal use cases mostly. And when it comes to C-suite, what I see is that, the opinion are on the two opposite end of the spectrum, right? So there are a few people who are they have fear of missing out. No, we should start it. Otherwise, the competitors will be ahead in the game. And then on the other hand, they don't know, what kind of regulations and what kind of risk would be there. So let's not do it. But the right approach, I guess, as we discussed, would be start with low risk internal use cases, maybe some kind of chatbots. A lot of companies have started doing that. And that, I guess, might be the way to go forward.
Could I add something else? Sorry. So the business I work for, we were founded 4 years ago. And what I've seen actually, just to add, over the last 4 years is now more so than 4 years ago, our customers are actually looking for what's the ROI. So although some companies are taking the view that, yes, we're just going to implement it and we need an AI strategy, we're just going to do some AI for AI. But where we sit is actually, if we're going to be spending a significant amount of money, because in the field we work in, you need a degree of digitization first, which a lot of the time hasn't happened yet. So you need to go through a process. So if you're going to have an AI implementation, you need to do the digitization first. Okay, there's a shed ton of money that's going to be spent. Okay, so you need to do the calculation first in terms of what's the value, how am I going to identify, and when am I going to identify how much money is going back on the balance sheet?
Yeah, and listening to everyone, it kind of takes me back to I had a discussion with a CIO many years back, a decade or so, and talked about IT security policies, and he basically said, well, we're not going to spend too much money on security until something happens. Then we'll throw some money at it. And it kind of reflects.
Yeah, building muscles ahead of time is a good idea.
Yes.
Take a few reps before you guard Steph Curry, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think something on that is building trust between customer and vendor can be quite interesting in that respect. So again, we've got lots of relationships with kind of government entities because we're partially government owned. And if you already have a relationship in terms of the piece you're talking about, data in particular, you can facilitate quicker, faster development, trust, if you already have a kind of a established relationship.
Okay, great. Magdalena, you've come all the way from the UAE to join us here, and that's fantastic. And you deal with international energy companies, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Okay, so what I'm curious about is the impact of these regulations. You know, you have to deal with multiple jurisdictions, multiple countries in your work, and basically anybody who's digital, you know, is going to be crossing borders. You know, how do you see that playing out? You know, with all these, you know, you have EU and you have, you know, California and
Sleepless nights, basically. Sleepless nights. No, it's a minefield at the moment. I mean, I can hope all I want for some kind of international collaboration or more international collaboration. We're seeing more of it, you know, between, you know, the likes of the US and the EU, the US and the UK, within the GCC, so the Gulf Cooperation remit. So we are seeing more cooperation, but you're exactly right. There's like a jigsaw puzzle of regulation, even within the US alone. And I won't speak on your laws here, guys, in too much detail. But I mean, there's been a lot of criticism over the lack of kind of federal activity. And again, I won't get political, but we'll see how things work out in 2025 or what that looks like. But yeah, so for my job, it's incredibly challenging to look at, you know, so we develop AI. So how do we ensure we comply across the board where we're going to sell? So it takes a lot of time. Starting, so I like to get involved at the very, very start. So when we're talking about a POC, when we're talking about a pilot, where we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, with who, with what data. And actually data and data sovereignty is actually a really critical point because, again, we're talking about critical infrastructure and data that relates to critical infrastructure. And one, nobody wants to share it, first of all. And then two, nobody wants to, or there are restrictions around it going outside of country. So again, I'm never going to sleep again, probably, in terms of all the regulations. Does that, I think I've just talked around your question. I haven't actually answered it.
No,
How am I going to solve the problem of the disparities of international regulation? I'm not sure yet. Is the answer.
it's a lot to think about, right?
I mean, we have run into this before, and you brought up a great point around data sovereignty and data privacy. So the laws around data privacy have sort of standardized in sort of the U.S. view of the world and the EU view of the world, and those laws and regs have kind of leveled out, right? So we'll see something similar in the AI space. Until then, you have to look at your footprint, right? Where do you have customers, consumers, users of what you're building and distributing? And then look at the territories and what laws apply there now, what's coming down the pipeline. There is commonality to these things, so we always talk about rationalizing them across to find what's common and address what's common first, because you know that's going to be required in multiple jurisdictions, and then you start working towards the outliers, right? And that's the only way to really address ambiguous, sort of an ambiguous environment when it comes to regulation, because you're not going to have definitive answers for a while.
Yeah, if I can touch on that, I think what we thought was going to happen, with data protection in particular, we had the GDPR coming out of Europe, and then what's called the Brussels effect happened. So around the world, everyone went, oh, okay, let's do what they're doing, or to an extent anyway. And so what I think Europe is hoping is that the EU AI Act will also have that Brussels effect. And so the regs from the EU will then be kind of adopted in some nature across the world. We're not seeing that type of momentum at the moment in kind of any country. So we are seeing people kind of cherry pick. And in particular, what I like about, and I've absolutely drunk the UAE Kool-Aid, by the way, but what I like about what the government does in the UAE is it kind of stands back a little bit and waits to see what works and what doesn't work in a lot of other jurisdictions. And then again, it cherry picks what is positive and not positive. Actually, one of the first, going back to the finance aspect of what we're talking about here, so one of the first AI regulation in the UAE is actually out of the DIFC, which is the Dubai International Finance Center. So it's interesting that the first AI regulation in the UAE links to data and links to finance.
And you know, let's face it. When we look at the population, people are scared. You know, people are worried and scared about AI. You know, people who, not you folks, you understand AI, but the you know, Joe Q public, the average Joe has fear, and that's going to present itself to policymakers. You know, this is what, well, we need more stringent regulations. You know, the Synops. You know, everybody familiar with the Synops technology debacle that happened? It's the
But I think going back to what you guys were mentioning earlier, in terms of like discrimination happened already. So we have discrimination laws, data privacy happened already. We have data privacy and data security laws. So a lot of what some jurisdictions are doing is saying, okay, well, you can utilize your existing regulations and just apply them to AI.
Yeah, I want to make one comment on that because that is a concern of mine. As a startup, we do have to make decisions even on what markets we go into right now based on where things are. And there's actually companies that are forming to try to help startups navigate this. It's that complex. And then you add into the data sovereignty aspect of it, which is becoming increasingly, a fragmented internet, and that it does add some complexity. I think my concern though is that regulating too early, because there's just so much that we do not know. To your point, most things are still in pilot. Like to actually understand the downstream implications of these and the rate of change of the technology right now, it's very hard to regulate. One of the things that makes me think of this is if the Biden executive order that came out in 2023, and then you had the White House memorandum on AI that came out in October, they were radically different 1 year later. The Biden executive order in 2023 was trying to actually regulate model weights and different levels of like scrutiny, and they scrapped a lot of that. And so the concern I have is you're pushing all these regulations quickly. I like the UAE approach of just kind of, let's see, there's a risk reward there too, of being too late versus too early, but we really don't understand these models that well at this point. There's not a lot of explainability and interpretability yet. And we really don't even understand how people are going to use it as much on that side.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I was looking at like EU Act, and there are some rules and regulations or points in EU Act about like consumer protection. So if you're selling something to, let's say, an investor, you have to define whether it's high risk, low risk. And again, it's my personal opinion. There are not much on the model level, right? So if you have a big model, how you're controlling for hallucination accuracy, are there some metric around that? So that's something I find missing, and maybe they'll come up with these kind of metric in future. Another thing is the discrepancy between different countries. And there was one example I was seeing. There's something called FLOPS, which is a measure of the training, how much compute is needed in training. And the limit for Europe was 10 times less compared to the limit in US, right? So if you are using Llama 3 model, a 400 billion parameter, you can't use in Europe, but you can use in US, right? So a multinational company who's building a product around those Gen AI models, they don't know how to operate, right? So these kind of problems are there. I'm sure, the regulators have a tough job, but we'll see a few things coming in future.
Again, going back to how wonderful the UAE is, by the way. No, so one of the strategies that they've taken is that they actually sent, I think it's, I can't remember the exact figure, but it's over 1,000 of their ministers to a university in the UK to take an actual course on artificial intelligence. So understanding what it is, going back to some of the points you're making in terms of, well, we don't know how we're going to use it, how is it going to be applied. But if you get your regulators, your policymakers to actually educate themselves, or there's a program around educating who's going to be, creating the laws, I think that's actually a really helpful step forward.
Okay, great. Okay, I'd like to talk about the benefits, if you will, about AI. Generative AI, predictive AI. Can these be tools that can help us deal with all these regulations? Is there a plus side? Can AI help us with AI, basically?
Yeah, we work with a lot of use cases actually on the risk and compliance side. There's the traditional ones like KYC and KYB, that AI is being used in more point solutions in the past, but you're starting to see transformers using those type of workflows. But I think, I saw something recently, I think it was an EY study, and it said for chief risk officers, 2/3 say they're, woefully understaffed, essentially. And if you have this proliferation of regulations on top of that, they really cannot keep up if you're a global, institution at the end of the day. But think about like the activities that go on within compliance in general. A lot of it is gathering data from a variety of different sources or monitoring data. It is consolidating that data, looking at it and providing some degree of analysis on that data, and then making decisions, even if that's externally or even with like internal audit, type processes. AI is really good at that. Those are really good use cases actually for consolidating that, creating summaries, and creating it in a way to now your risk team is actually just making decisions or thinking about how do we do change management or how do we actually communicate it, things that humans are better at, rather than spending time typing, downloading papers and doing this kind of whole side. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there, along with things like continuous monitoring and others.
Yeah, I was speaking at another conference a month or so ago, and I don't always come and talk about the risks. I talk about the opportunity as well. So I don't like to be in the business of no either. So that session was specifically around the top 5 use cases in cyber for leveraging AI to basically improve your cyber defense capabilities. The number one area of focus that we see across our clients is compliance optimization, right? There's a lot of highly repetitive manual processes that through AI and automation, you can really make far more effective, not only in the sense of being more efficient, but actually more effective in terms of responding to incidents more quickly, identifying issues earlier on. So there is a lot of opportunity for AI in that space. So when I'm talking about AI, I'm usually talking about, in cyber, I'm usually talking about cyber as the enabler of business adoption of AI. And then I'm also talking about adopting AI within the business of cyber to improve your cyber defense.
Yeah, this is a really good example of what I like to call job displacement, I don't say job displacement, job augmentation as a result of AI. Scratch that, I didn't say that at all. So I think the narrative is that AI is going to create job displacement. But in terms of law firms, lawyers, compliance, risk officers, there's another business opportunity. There's another revenue stream, of utilizing legal tech, legal ops in this way. So it's a way of demonstrating the job augmentation that can be created and further opportunities for AI.
Just like AI should be augmented intelligence, right?
Yeah, as opposed to me.
It's supposed to be.
But I think this augmentation part is important. And one of the things I wanted to comment on, earlier we were talking about, there's a lot of people that maybe are afraid, but it's also generational. We find that, students coming out of college now, they expect that they're going to be working with AI and they want to day in and day out. And we hear that actually from some of our customers where they're saying, as a part of that ROI analysis, one of the soft benefits is my employees want to be working with AI and they're asking, how are we going to be, utilizing that in the day-to-day work? And they don't want to do the things that, previous generations we've done of filling in Excel spreadsheets or whatever it may be. And so I think that's also a real benefit because, I was thinking about it even in preparing for this. I had 3 different AI, agents up doing different research and going back and forth. I'm like, how crazy is that? 2 years ago, all of this would have been insane, but now it's just a daily part of my, workflow. And I think we'll see more of that in departments like compliance too.
Yeah, just to add, compliance and risk, the traditional AI that we talked about, that was actually being used earlier as well. Because the NLP, natural language processing, it can understand documents better. So there have been tools and products by different big organizations as well, where they are able to process multiple documents in seconds that used to take a lot of hours, right? With Gen AI, we'll get that boost because Gen AI can understand language much more better, not just language, numbers and everything. So we definitely see the boost in compliance and privacy and all these risks as well with Gen AI.
So we can definitely say that there's more risk in not using AI than there is in using AI, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to open up the questions for the audience. If any of you have questions you want to put to our panelists, the experts are right here, and I see a hand over there. Okay. Can AI help with a financial crisis? Okay, if we had another occurrence like that?
I don't know if you could say prevent, but if the concept of utilizing AI is that it looks for patterns, so in theory it could potentially predict crises or disasters or catastrophic events. In theory, they do the same for weather. So
the human in the loop is the problem on that one. Right? Yeah. So it's decisions being made for reasons outside of the logic of that you're going to get from AI.
Well, I think there's one other aspect of this, so if you told a transformer model, I want you to generate profit for my organization, which is some of the activity, right, that people were driving pre-2008. profit can mean so many different things in so many different contexts that I don't think you could prevent that type of behavior. In fact, it could actually, if you were to utilize it in that way, make things a little bit worse. But I do think on like monitoring and like actually having like signals of this is a problem earlier probably would have helped.
Yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, yes, please.
So what would a control posture be for multi-agent AI development? What a possible control posture would look like besides just a being in the loop? Because I think, that could also impact speed to market, right? The value proposition of having a multi-agent product is speed. I'm thinking. So.
I think we talked about a couple of them in form of like, if you're talking about generative AI, hallucination and accuracy. Just to add to that, I mean, the reasoning is another thing. I mean, if you're asking Gen AI for a question.
Well, I'm looking for controls around the systemic risk of the multi-agent framework, right?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that we're starting to see in different products that help with this. One, I think, is the explainability it proves. So throughout the chain, you have a little more visibility into what's occurring. The second is a lot of these systems are now beginning to log their actions in multi-agent frameworks. And so you can actually see what's occurred at each step at a step-by-step level.
You have to look at the agents and what they're capable of doing, what kind of actions they're going to take. You have to determine what's acceptable, not acceptable. You're going to have a layer of monitoring across all of the agents, so you're going to be looking at the interactions in real time. You're going to look at the inputs and outputs between the agents specifically, and then based on analysis, potentially through IML, you're going to do some classification. You're going to make a determination as to, is this a yes or a no? And if it's a no, you're going to block it, right? And you're going to prevent it from the downstream systems from picking it up. Within each agent, you're also going to instruct it not to do certain things. Don't take inputs that do X, Y, Z. These are the thresholds, et cetera. So again, these are things from a security perspective we've dealt with for a long time. You're just applying some of those techniques in a multi-agent scenario as opposed to a multi-system scenario.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, there are a couple of validation agents as well. So what validation agents do is like they look at the alternative sources of information data and check against the actual data that you're producing, right? So that might be helpful as well.
Okay, any more? I'll cast your hand over here. Okay.
We'd love to hear what was your experience when you were creating the agreements, the legal agreements that govern your institutions and your AI providers. Did you get your lawyers together to do it from scratch? Did you ask somebody? Did you ask AI maybe?
I am the AI provider. So I'm the AI provider lawyer. So I draft them from scratch.
Yeah, in our case, our OGC, or someone who specializes this within our Office of General Counsel, negotiated all the terms, et cetera. And if we can't get to terms, then we don't do it.
Yeah, it's actually the same as enterprise contracts we've been negotiating forever. There's some new clauses or new sections in there. The only thing that I've found different in the onboarding kind of process, you have InfoSec, then you have legal and all those aspects, is there are AI counsels that are appearing in most organizations that now serve as like a diligence step. And those typically have some legal representation involved. So it is kind of like a second step where there's some discussion, but otherwise it's the same enterprise approach.
If I could just raise a point in terms of when I am looking at negotiating contracts, one of the things that we probably take more time on that I've seen in other types of technology contracts, it's still very important in terms of other technology contracts, but I can see the prospects for disputes in terms of acceptance. So what does your scope actually look like? What's the acceptance testing and what's the acceptance criteria? And already, even before you start a project, everyone thinks it's this, but it's actually this, it's Y, it's red, it's yellow, it's blue. So there needs to be some really crystal clear drafting and conversations actually, and ensuring people have an understanding around, okay, because a lot of the time your acceptance will actually link to you getting paid. So, what is it that you're expecting to have been delivered by when, and when do people want their money? Or like what triggers the money? And I think that's a real key aspect of contracting for AI.
Yeah, if you're on the technology side, I would say really understanding your use case extremely well is the best way to help your attorney, right? Because they're not going to know like the ins and outs of the technology and what data is involved and what the data flow is through which systems, et cetera, the better you understand that and can articulate that, it's easier. It's going to make their job to determine what's acceptable and not.
Okay, wonderful. I think we're, yeah, okay, we hit our limit. No, there's so much more we could discuss, but our panelists, give us a round of applause for our panelists. What a great,
Thank you guys.
what a great
You guys.
discussion. Thank you very much.